I knew about Vesalius for years because I was doing something similar to Vesalius, that is lecturing and teaching on the human body, the cadaveric body, and I became interested more in his book many years before Daniel Garrison and I met, because I could see from the little I knew about it that Vesalius and I were doing similar things as every anatomist has done since the 16th century. The book is very interesting in that it's probably the first book in modern anatomy, and it forms what people call the foundations for modern medical science. It's both a textbook, an atlas, and a dissection manual in many ways, which is what we even use today in teaching anatomy to medical students and graduate students. It's interesting because he says a lot of the things that we want our students to realize, like observe what you think. Don't believe everything that the book says. Don't believe the pretty atlases that you look at. He said the same thing. Believe what you see in the dissection. And this was particularly important because at a time when many books were hypothetical, things that people never really saw, they just made up, or a lot of the anatomy was based on primate anatomy from a guy named Galen who lived in the 2nd century AD. He brought the idea of dissecting the human body as the only way to know the human body. And that is what we do in anatomy today. Also, he said, there are many variations in the body. And that's what we try to tell our students to look for today. In the many, many bodies that we have in a laboratory with the many medical students we teach in the medical school, look for all the variations. Go from body to body. Nothing is that consistent, except maybe in the very pretty atlases that people buy. And so the book has formed the basis of what we teach today. And it's interesting that for about, 450 years, 475 years, the way he organized the book is the way textbooks were organized post-Vesalius, post-16th century, into systems. The bones as a separate part of an anatomy text, and the muscles, and then the vascular supply and the respiratory system and the neurological system and the gut, and then the brain, for example. And this system has remained with books in Western civilization up until, I guess, the last 25 years or so. Now textbooks, even the very large ones like Gray's Anatomy, are being organized more into regional. But you know something? Vesalius, when he dissected and taught, he really taught regionally, the way we dissect today in the 16th century, which is kind of interesting. He organized the book into systems like bones, muscles, and veins and arteries separately. But when he taught a region, one region at a time, the head and the neck, or the chest, or the upper extremity, the arms, or the legs. And that, of course, continues today. But as I said, the difference between the two is that though the book was organized by systems, the teaching was not. Anyway, that is what the book was generally about. It formed the foundations of modern medical science. It brought us to a point of looking at the body, let us say, the microcosm. I think about that word microcosm because I think about the word macrocosm. When I think of that word, I think of Nicholas Copernicus, who also had a book that was published the same year. And he took us from the fanciful ideas of Ptolemy about the sun and revolving around the earth to a more modern perspective of the planets revolving around the sun. It's interesting that both books were published the same year, and they were probably two of the most important books published, probably the most important books in science. And so you can look at the microcosm, that would be Vesalius.